I turned off the television in the middle of the rosary that my own mother was praying. It was 4 in the morning. She had the blue rosary in her hands, the beads worn from so much use, and next to her, kneeling on the floor, was my 16-year-old son trying to keep up with the prayer. I looked at both of them, and I turned everything off without hesitation. Then I unplugged the router, and I said, with a firmness that still embarrasses me to this day, "As long as you live in my house, this rosary doesn't come in here." 3 days later, my mother was in the ICU, connected to machines, struggling to breathe, and I was alone in a hospital corridor listening to a doctor tell me that the next few hours would be crucial. At that moment, the only thing I could remember was my mother's face when the screen went black. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just held the rosary tighter and said softly, "My son, prayer never does harm." My name is Carlos Alberto Fernandez. For years I was a pastor. I preached in churches. I counseled families. I prayed for sick people in hospitals. I truly believed that I was defending the faith. But that morning, sitting on the empty sofa in my house, I had to face a truth that no sermon had taught me. Sometimes the greatest enemy of a man's faith is his own pride. But let me tell you how it all began, because this is not just the testimony of a mistake. It's the story of something that happened in that ICU that I still can't explain with words. I grew up in Salvador, Bahia. My father died early. My mother, Mrs. Helena, raised the children practically alone. She cleaned houses, ironed clothes, did whatever came her way. But there was one thing that never lacked in our home. Even before the sun rose, she was already sitting in the living room with the rosary in her hands, praying silently. As a child, I thought that was beautiful. It was part of the house, the smell of the morning, the routine. But the years went by. I joined an evangelical church. I learned to preach. I studied the Bible in depth. I became a pastor. And along with the faith, something grew inside me that I never realized while I was growing up. A hardness, a pride disguised as conviction. What once seemed beautiful to me, my mother praying the rosary before dawn, began to bother me. In my mind, that was wrong. It was something that needed to be corrected. And when I brought my mother to live with me, I thought it was time to correct it. When I invited my mother to live with us, she resisted. She said she didn't want to be a burden, but I insisted. I wanted to repay everything she had done for me. The first few months were calm. My wife, Ana Paula, treated her with affection. My son, Lucas, loved to sit and talk with his grandmother for hours on end. It seemed that everything was at peace, but there was one detail I hadn't anticipated. During Lent, every morning, around 4 o'clock, my mother would wake up quietly, turn on the living room television, and follow a live broadcast on YouTube. A rosary led by a friar. Thousands of people praying together at that hour. At first, I ignored it. It was an old habit of hers. It would pass. But one morning, I woke up to the low sound coming from the living room and went to see what it was, and what I saw. I stopped at the entrance of the living room, unable to move. My mother was on the sofa with the rosary in her hands, and Lucas, my 16-year-old son, was kneeling on the floor next to her, with a white rosary in his hands, trying to keep up with the prayer. The light from the television illuminated their faces. They were concentrated, at peace. And within me, that scene ignited a fire that I still can't quite explain today. The next morning, I didn't sleep well. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. When the sound of the television reached my room, I got up. I walked to the living room. I grabbed the remote control, and I turned everything off right in the middle of the prayer. The room fell silent immediately. My mother slowly raised her eyes. So did Lucas. I said with all the firmness I had, "I've already said it. This doesn't enter my house." My mother took a deep breath. "My son, we are just praying. This isn't prayer. It's an invented tradition. Only Jesus saves." She was quiet for a moment, and then she asked a question I didn't expect. "You pray for the people in your church, don't you?" "Of course." "You ask God for them?" "Yes." She tilted her head slightly. "Then why couldn't Mary, who is next to Jesus, also ask for us?" The room went silent. I had no answer, and that irritated me more than any argument could have irritated me. I walked over to the router. I unplugged it. "It's over." My mother didn't respond. She just lowered her eyes and held the rosary tighter, but it was Lucas's face that remained etched in my memory. He wasn't afraid. He was disappointed. With his father. I went back to the room thinking I had solved the problem. 2 days later, my mother could no longer breathe properly. That morning, my mother woke up differently, quieter. She refused coffee. She said she was tired. My wife noticed before I did. "Carlos, your mother isn't well." I tried to downplay it. "It's just tiredness, Anna." But by the end of the afternoon, her body simply gave out. Her breathing became heavy. Her lips lost color. And when we arrived at the hospital, the doctors acted too quickly for it to be something simple. Tests, machines, nurses running, doors closing. I stood outside, not understanding anything. Shortly after, Dr. Ricardo Meneses called me into the hallway. He closed the door before speaking. That told me everything. "Mr. Carlos, we need to be realistic." I felt my whole body freeze. "Your mother's age weighs heavily in this situation. Mrs. Helena arrived here very weak." He paused. "The next few hours will be decisive." I couldn't respond. I, who for years had come to hospitals to pray for other families, to give comfort, to talk about faith and hope, now was on the inside of the pain, and I didn't know what to do with it. When I entered the ICU and saw my mother in that bed, she looked small. The woman who faced life with a strength I never fully understood was now too fragile to hold her own weight. I approached slowly. I held her hand. My mother's hands had always been marked by work, years of cleaning other people's houses to raise her children. Now they were cold. And the last time I had looked at those hands, they were holding a rosary while I turned off the television. The guilt didn't come slowly. It fell all at once, like a block of concrete in the middle of my chest. That night, I went home for a few hours. I said I needed to take a shower, but the truth is, I needed to breathe. The house was silent, too silent. I sat on the living room couch, the same couch where my mother prayed every morning. I tried to pray. I closed my eyes. The words didn't come. I, who preached about faith for years, who prayed out loud in front of hundreds of people, who advised families in the most difficult moments, couldn't form a single sentence. It was then that I picked up my phone, just to hear something, anything to calm the silence inside me. When I opened the video app, a live broadcast appeared on the screen. It was exactly 4 a.m, and it was the same rosary that I had banned from my house. Friar Pedro Ortiz was there, holding the rosary, praying slowly. I stood there staring at the screen, and for the first time, I didn't close it. I kept looking at the screen, not knowing what to do with what I was feeling. Part of me wanted to close it immediately, the same part that had turned off the television days before, but there was another part, deeper, quieter. That made me stay. The comments kept rolling up on the screen, thousands of people awake at 4 a.m, asking for prayer. My daughter is hospitalized. My husband was diagnosed today. I have no more strength. I read each of those requests. And for the first time in a long time, I stopped seeing myself as the man who had the answers, and saw myself as just another one, desperate, with no ground beneath me. It was then that the friar said something that made me freeze on the couch, without warning, with no preparation at all. If there is someone in your heart that you need to forgive, or someone you need to ask forgiveness from, don't wait any longer. The silence in the room became heavy. I felt those words slowly descend through my chest, like warm water in a frozen body. And for the first time, I asked myself a question I had never truly asked. What if the problem was never my mother's faith? What if the problem had always been my pride? I couldn't finish watching the broadcast. I grabbed the car keys, and I went back to the hospital in the dark. The city was empty. The clock read just after 4 a.m. When I entered the ICU, the environment was quiet, just the sound of the machines, the slow beep of the heart monitor. I approached my mother's bed. I held her hand again, and I knelt down, not as a pastor, as a son. The words came out broken. "God, I was too hard." Tears came without warning. I judged my mother's faith. I treat it as a mistake, something that has always been sacred to her. I used the Bible as a shield for my pride. I took a deep breath, and then I did something I never imagined I would do in my life. I looked at my mother lying in that bed, and I said quietly, "Virgin of Guadalupe, if you truly intercede for us, I ask you to intercede now." The room remained silent. Nothing changed visibly, but inside me, something unraveled. A peace I couldn't name took the place of everything that was weighing on my chest. It had been a long time since I felt something like that. A few minutes later, a nurse came in to check the machines. She stopped at the door, looked around the room with a strange expression, and asked, "What rose perfume is this?" I looked around. There were no flowers. There was nothing. But the smell was there, soft, real, undeniable. And early in the morning, when the doctors came in to evaluate, my mother's vital signs had changed in a way they themselves couldn't explain. Dr. Ricardo entered the room that morning with a different expression. It was no longer that heavy look from the hallway. It was different, confused, surprised. He checked the machine slowly, looked at the tests, compared the numbers from the previous night with those from the morning, and then he turned to me. "Mr. Carlos, there has been an improvement we didn't expect." I said nothing. Given the condition in which she arrived here, this is not common. He chose his words carefully. As a doctor, as a man of science, but I saw in his eyes something he didn't say out loud. He also had no explanation. My wife, Ana Paula, was outside with Lucas when I went out to tell them. My son looked at me for a second and came to hug me without saying anything. It was the heaviest and lightest hug I ever received in my life. Heavy for everything that had happened. Light because something between the two of us was also being healed there. My mother stayed a few more days in the hospital, but she came home with the blue rosary in her hands. And this time I said nothing. This time I sat beside her. I let the broadcast turn on, and I stayed there in silence, listening to the friar pray, not because I had changed everything I believed in all at once, but because I had finally understood something that years of preaching hadn't taught me. True faith doesn't need to crush someone else's faith to stand firm. Pride disguised as conviction is one of the most dangerous deceptions that exist, because it seems right, it sounds right, until the day you are kneeling on the floor of an ICU without words, and you realize that the woman you tried to correct your whole life always knew something you were still learning. That prayer is prayer, that faith is faith, and that God is greater than any wall we build in His name. Today my mother still wakes up before the sun. She still sits on the couch with the blue rosary in her hands, and sometimes, when I walk through the living room at that time, I stop, and I look at her for a few seconds, thinking about how much I almost lost, not just her, but everything that scene represents. A woman who never let her faith fall, not even when her own son tried to extinguish her light. If this testimony touched something inside you, if you have someone in your life who needs forgiveness or an apology, don't wait for the ICU to teach you what love should have taught you before. Write here in the comments, Blue Rosary, so I know you made it to the end, and that you also believe that miracles still happen. Don't forget to leave your like, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share this video with a family member or friend who needs to be inspired by my testimony. May God bless you and your whole family. Amen.